And our second main topic today gets submitted to us by Nameless Entity, who writes, "Hey, John. It's no secret for almost every Marvel studio film reshoots occur. In a recent interview, Bruce Campbell explained Marvel is constantly updating the film's Doctor Strange 2 storyline and told Sam Raimi he had to reshoot scenes and scrap the ones that no longer apply. He further added that he isn't even sure that he will end up in the film. John, isn't it a little bit concerning that Marvel is still updating the film's storyline this late into the reshooting and then asking Sam to delete and add scenes? And couldn't this lead to a distraction in Sam's vision for the film? What do you think about this, John? Thanks." All right. Thanks a lot for saying that in, Nameless Entity. And yeah, so there's this interview going around right now with Bruce Campbell and talking about, what can we expect from Doctor Strange 2? And Bruce Campbell basically revealed that, they're working on this thing right down to the deadline, and they're making Sam add scenes that he didn't initially plan on. They're making him remove scenes, and quite frankly, I don't know who's in it. Actually, let's get more specific. This is what comes to us from the folks over at Game Informer, quoting Bruce Campbell, who said the following: "The Marvel guys, they make 8 of these movies at the same time, so they're always updating storylines. So my buddy Sam Raimi has had to add scenes that Marvel told him he had to shoot, and he's removed scenes that no longer apply. So until May rolls around, I don't think Benedict Cumberbatch even knows if he's in the movie or not," which I think is an awesome line of the thing. All right, so here's the thing. The question is, should we be concerned about them still tinkering with this? By the way, I think by now, as of this moment, the film is probably completely it's sealed up. It's in the can. It's on the shelf. But still, they worked on this thing really late into the process. Number one, should that concern us? Number two, should the interference from Marvel concern us? Let's talk about the working on it late into the game. The best way I know how to describe that is this. Rob, there was a time where if I didn't have an off the top by like an hour and a half before the show, then we didn't cover it. Even if it came up, we would wait till the next day, because then we gotta figure out how this is going to work into the flow of the show. Getting the sites and the graphics together and blah blah blah. But the more and more we did the John Campea show, well, that went from an hour and a half to an hour, and that from an hour to 45 minutes, and that. I just got so comfortable with it. Literally now, 10 seconds before the show starts, I can throw in off the top. It's fine because we know we can do it. We're accustomed to it. We know what we're doing. I know exactly how much time we have, all that kind of stuff. On a significant multiplied by 1,000,000 times scale, I think Marvel and Kevin Feige are at that same place. They're like, we've done this so many times now. We know exactly how much time we've got. We know we can take this thing up to a certain deadline. And then they probably push that envelope even more every time. So Kevin Feige has publicly said many times that he likes, after the movie is shot, to then get into the edit room, look at the dailies, and he'll come up with new ideas. It's like, you know what? What if we did this? And that's why they plan reshoots. And if he's still got the money and he wants even more reshoots after that because he's got another new idea, or now he thinks something else doesn't work, they'll go in and change that. And they can do that right up to the last second. And so on that level, I wouldn't worry about it at all. I wouldn't worry about that in the least. Now, should Marvel fans be worried that Marvel is so heavily interfering with quote unquote Sam Raimi's vision? Well, the answer to that question is also no. And I'll tell you why you shouldn't worry that Marvel is messing with Sam Raimi's vision. Because every Marvel movie, and we've talked about this before, guys, every Marvel movie is not really the director's movie. It's Kevin Feige's movie. They're there to execute Kevin Feige's vision, and absolutely films like Coogler and other guys, they definitely bring their own thing to the table. Absolutely they do. But make no mistake, at the end of the day, the scenes that stay are the ones that Kevin says stay. The scenes that get removed are the ones that Kevin say get removed. And nobody has anything to say about it. He'll listen to input. He does. He listens to input from everybody that works for him. He'll evaluate that, and then he'll make his decision. But once that decision's done, it's his decision. And this is why I laugh, Rob, sometimes when people say, oh, studio interference. Do you like Marvel movies? Oh, I love Marvel movies. There is no studio that interferes more than Marvel. That's not hyperbole either, Rob. That is one by a mile. That is 100% fact. There is no studio that interferes with the directors more than Kevin Feige and Marvel.
I wouldn't call it interference.
It absolutely is interference. It's 100%. The only thing is, when it's something we don't like, we call it interference. When it's something that we think works out great, we don't call it interference. But it is interference.
Well, look, I think that the Marvel movies are designed to be a collaboration. They're more like television shows than movies, really. Because on a TV show, a director is hired to execute the vision of the showrunner. And the director gets to direct the actors and things like that, pick the shots with the DP. But ultimately, the producers of the TV show, the showrunners, they're the ones that finalize the edit. They're the ones that make it the way they want it to be. That's kind of how Marvel movies work. The directors know, like when you bring on James Gunn, he'd never directed a $150 million movie before. But Kevin Feige knows, looking at Super and looking at Slither, I want that sensibility for Guardians of the Galaxy. But James Gunn knows from the get-go that he's working in tandem and collaboration with Marvel from the beginning. So I don't think Kevin Feige comes down from on high and says, Sam Raimi, move aside. It's my turn. I'm going to come in here. Because remember, they worked together on the 3 Spider-Man movies Sam Raimi directed. So Sam Raimi knows that he's in collaboration with Marvel. They know that from the outset. And I think that fruitful collaboration for a director actually becomes a new tool in their toolbox. And I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, you could call it, I guess, interference, but because it goes from the very beginning of the process all the way through, I mean, I'm sure Sam Raimi understands before he even starts that this is what's going to happen as they make the film.
But I mean, that becomes a matter of semantics, right? I mean, listen, because at the end of the day, the director is not in charge of this movie, right? Kevin Feige's in charge. And if, like, we always call it interference if a studio goes to a director and says, oh, we want you to add this. And well, that wasn't what the director wanted to do. And then we label that interference. Right. The only difference, and it is a difference, and you pointed this out, the only difference is that I believe that the directors go in understanding that this is going to happen. It doesn't change what's happening. It's just that they know this was, I think every director going in has to understand, because we've talked about this. One of the great strengths of Kevin Feige, I think, is the fact that he will sit down with his directors and he'll say, okay, look, we're doing a Squirrel Girl movie. Okay. And no, I'm making this up, guys. Don't, John Campea report Squirrel Girl getting made, but we're going to do a Squirrel Girl movie. Okay. Here's the thing. I need this to happen in it, and this needs to happen, and this needs to happen, and this needs to happen. Because of some things I got going on in other movies, you can't do this, or this, or this, or this. So here's your playground, all right? Here's your playground. Inside this playground, you go nuts. Just remember to stay within the boundaries that I have set for you. And then for the most part, then the directors are allowed to jump into that sandbox. Sometimes it's a very small sandbox, sometimes it's a little bit bigger. And they're allowed to exercise their creativity within those boundaries. But even then, Kevin Feige will come along and say, this isn't working for me. I remember he did this a lot. Peyton Reed talked about this as well on Ant-Man. When there was something that wasn't working or that Kevin Feige felt wasn't working, he came in and said this. Joss Whedon talks about this with Thing, because Joss Whedon's like original idea for Avengers, which I think is the greatest comic book movie of all time, he was not going to have Black Widow in that movie. Right. He wanted Wasp. And Kevin Feige came along and said, no, we got plans for Black Widow. So we're going to need you to take Wasp out and put in Black Widow instead. The only difference between this and a lot is that the thing is, it works. I mean, it totally works, because I liked the analogy you used, actually, the whole idea about Kevin Feige is really more of the showrunner of the MCU.
Yes.
And I think that's a great way of looking at it. But I'm just saying, I do find it funny that people will complain about studio interference, but they won't call out studio interference when the results are good. When the results are good, it's great. But when the results are bad, it's studio interference. Here's the fact of the matter. Every studio, because at the end of the day, the movie is not the director's movie. He's not paying for it.
Right.
The movie belongs to the studio. It's their movie. It's their money. It's their plans and their company, and it's everything rides on them. And so this is just a situation where Kevin Feige is more hands-on.
Yeah, but I think all directors and all the filmmakers, they know from the outset that they're in collaboration with their studio and their producer.
Yes.
What's different is if let's go over to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers will hire a guy like David Ayer to write and direct a Suicide Squad, or have Zack Snyder come in based on Man of Steel. If something happens at the studio, like Zack Snyder's making his movie, and maybe Batman v Superman didn't make $1 billion, then the studio panics, and Zack Snyder's making his movie, and the studio's like, you know what, we don't, you're going the wrong direction. We don't like what you're doing. Like they're second guessing him. They go in, despite the tragedy in his life. Then the studio, they just take the movie away. David Ayer locked out of the edit bay. Your version of the movie, we're not going to go with that anymore. We're going to step in and change it. Like there's no collaboration there. The studio, like the people on high who aren't filmmakers themselves, the studio comes in and goes, "We're going to get a trailer company to re-edit Suicide Squad." Why?
Yeah, but that's the specific. That's happened with Kevin Feige as well. Let's look back. We spoke about Ant-Man for a second. Let's look at the situation with Edgar Wright, right? Like Kevin Feige just basically sat down with Edgar and said, look, the version of Ant-Man you want to do doesn't work for me anymore.
Right, but that was, again, it was iterative.
Iterative, but still it's the same thing. It's like the movie we agreed to make, that doesn't work for us anymore. And we still want you to direct it, but it's going to have to be a different movie now. And Edgar Wright said, well, this is the movie I want to direct, not that one. Also, Ray, you had something you want to say. Guys, we want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Mint Mobile. You know, the one with the delightful ads with good Canadian kid Ryan Reynolds. So look, after years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, is that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't a catch. And guys, that's no joke, because for years I've been using one of the major providers and it was fine. But I switched over to Mint Mobile a little while ago. The service has been fantastic. And the big difference is I'm now paying about 1/3 of what I was paying before. And the best part for anybody who just hates their phone bills is that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. All of their plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone number along with all your existing contacts. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/Campea. That's mintmobile.com/Campea. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Campea.
I say normally, like, just being so, like, maybe last second, as the email said, it would be worrisome. But I think this movie's the only one where I'll let that pass, only because of the subject matter. It's the multiverse of madness. So it's like all the possibilities I can have. I mean, I'm just hoping, like everyone else, whatever was taken out or whatever's getting put in makes the movie better.
Well, and I would also say something could happen when they're making this, because this happens too. They could have been making this movie and they saw when they're making it, like Sam Raimi might have done something like, ooh, that's interesting. Let's use that. And they might use it in the next movie or a movie down the line. And it wasn't planned. And Kevin Feige's like, you know what, Sam? We have an idea. And it's based on something you did. So we want to create something new.
I mean, that could, but now we're making up a fake scenario, right? We're making up a hypothetical because Bruce, the way Bruce says is they made Sam add this stuff that he didn't plan on,
also
and
actors,
they made him take stuff out.
But if you look at the way he's talking about it, I mean, I think that, remember,
because it's happened before with Sam Raimi.
Remember, Bruce Campbell is a kind of guy that's worked with Sam Raimi all the way back to Evil Dead in 1980, 42 years.
Very close.
So this is a different way. Sam Raimi hasn't had to work this way. He's been an auteur since the beginning of his career. This is the first time he stepped into this. I mean, he had to deal with Sony on Spider-Man 3 too, which is a nightmare. But and that was a studio. But this is different in the sense that this movie is coming off of another movie and is leading into other movies. So they have to think about the entire. So Sam Raimi isn't just directing one movie, he's directing part of a quilt, or part of a square in a giant quilt that also has to work. So he's never had to deal with that.
So, but going back to the Sony situation, right? Sony went to him and said, okay, we want Venom in the third Spider-Man movie. No different than Kevin Feige going to Joss Whedon and say, we want Black Widow in this movie. The difference was, in one, it worked, so we celebrate that they told him to do that. In the other, it didn't work, and we say, oh, it's because of studio interference. No, and listen, I love Sam Raimi. You know, I've gotten together with Sam Raimi several times. I love the guy. I love his films. But I've always said this about that Sony situation was, okay, if the studio tells you to use that villain, then go make a good movie with that villain. I mean, Joss Whedon got stuck with the same scenario. Like, you can't have this, you got to have this. All right, so instead of whatever, he just went and made a great movie with those characters instead. It's just that, again, I think the issue is with us as the fans, that when the results are good, you know what I always say? Winning cures everything, right? Winning makes everything else okay. Like, on one, I don't know if it was you did this specifically, but on the Lord of the Rings list, like, Peter Jackson talks about how, yeah, he got a lot of notes from New Line about things he had to do. If the movies turned out terrible, we would be pointing back at that and going, studio interference, but it turned out great, and so we celebrate the movies as some of the greatest movies of all time.
You know, this makes this Blu-ray much more of a purchase for me.
The Doctor Strange?
Just because of director commentary to see, because I think for Sam Raimi fans, without the MCU, whatever, I think, like, you know, I guess they would be a little disappointed because they want to see their favorite director's, like, vision of what it's supposed to be.
Well,
which would be cool to hear on the Blu-ray at least.
There's a huge difference we also haven't mentioned. Kevin Feige is the actual producer of these films.
Yes, he is.
Whereas he's also the head of the studio.
He's both.
But he's also the producer, and he's a creative, hands-on producer. And a great producer has that kind of a relationship with the director. So he, as the producer, forget that he's a studio. He's working in tandem with his directors,
right?
And he's
but he can force them to make some changes because he is the studio.
No,
head.
he can, but I think that he is much more than any other studio executive, maybe in history. He is first and foremost a creative, as opposed to being a suit. He's not just a suit. And I think at Warner Brothers, they're suits, and at Sony, what Sam Raimi had to deal with were suits, because they make these random, like, what's your creative decision based on? Why are you just deciding, like, he wanted to use, there was another villain he wanted to use that he wasn't able to use in Spider-Man 3.
I don't think it was Vulture, because he was going to use that in Spider-Man 4.
Yeah, he was going to something else. And the studio's like, they'll tell him something, and Raimi's like, why do you say that?
Right, but again, it goes back to when it works, we all celebrate it.
Yes.
Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, right? It's just when it doesn't work, that's when we point it out and then pretend like studio interference is the culprit.
I think it comes down to the creative impulse, though. Who's being creative? Whereas Kevin Feige's doing something from a creative producing standpoint and a studio standpoint. But then there's studio interference where they make these crazy decisions based on stuff that's random,
right,
or
many
outside
times it
elements.
Works. That's the problem. The thing is, we don't talk about the 8 times out of 10 that it works. When it turns out to be a disaster, then we point at it and go, it's the same thing, kind of like with the Kathleen Kennedy situation, right? Where it's like, listen, everybody knows, I don't think Kathleen Kennedy should be the head of Lucasfilm. I mean, I loved the decision when she was hired, but we have seen what has happened, and we've learned that maybe this isn't the best fit for her. That being said, when a project goes terribly wrong, it's Kathleen Kennedy's fault. When a project goes extremely right, that had nothing to do with Kathleen Kennedy. And that's kind of the same thing as when a movie goes wrong and the studio had influence in it, it was studio interference. But the 8 out of the 10 movies that studios apply pressure to or apply influence over and they turn out great, well, that had nothing to do with it.
You know, I have a feeling everyone's saving this energy for after the movie comes out, because the end result, we'll go back on this. We will go back and talk about this, depending on the movie.
I can guarantee you, if Doctor Strange 2 ends up bad, which, let's be honest, it's not, but if it does, I guarantee you there's a good chunk of the fan base that's going to point back to this interview with Bruce Campbell and say, the reason the movie didn't work was because of studio interference. And that's just ridiculous. Because the point, I guess, is, as you were alluding to as well, This is how all the Marvel movies work.
Yeah.
This isn't like Sam Raimi is just the first director to experience that, oh, I don't just get to do my vision. That's every Marvel movie, and it's worked out pretty well so far.
And also, you know, movies are very iterative. You brought up Lord of the Rings. When they were shooting, or pardon me, when they were scoring the movie, when they were scoring the Two Towers in London,
Howard Shore.
the Ents didn't attack Isengard. That wasn't even in the movie. They're actually scoring the film, and they're like, we need to change the end of this movie. It doesn't work. And I mean, at the 11th hour, Peter Jackson contacted Weta. They had a big conference call and said to the guys, I need you to come up with scenarios where the Ents are doing things as they attack Isengard. Come up with gags that we can shoot. And then they came up with Sam, that narration. The great stories, Mr. Frodo, he narrates the end of the Two Towers, creating this ending that didn't exist. The Two Towers ending was a mess, and they're scoring it. And it was literally, you had Mark Ordesky, who was the studio guy. They were working on this literally at the very last minute. The end of Two Towers comes, and you would never know.
Because by that point, they'd already shot most of Return of the King.
Oh, yeah. You'd never know. You look at the end of that movie, you can't imagine it ending another way. That film was a mess. Literally very, very close to the 11th hour when they had to deliver it.
I'm glad you brought up Lord of the Rings. Wasn't that such a good movie? That was a great movie.
A movie with a lot of last
But
minute
you haven't
changes.
seen Two Towers. Well, you have, but
We will soon, or will again soon. But a movie that had a lot of last minute changes, that had a lot of studio notes, that had all that kind of stuff. And I guess, Rob, what you and I would probably agree on is this: the key. There are some exceptions. But I think we would agree that the key to a great movie is a great collaboration between studio and director.
Right.
100%.
Right?
Also, you know,
100%.
Sam Raimi didn't walk off or isn't angry, so maybe the changes aren't that bad.
Because I think what Rob said was right. I think like Raimi, and I think all Kevin Feige makes, because he's a communicator. Kevin Feige communicates. I think Sam Raimi, and who knows, maybe he was a little bit perturbed. Listen, anybody who's a creator, they will get they get defensive of their creation, and they should. But I think he understood going in that this will probably happen at some point.
Well, imagine me, right? Like some mornings I'll spend so long on the thumbnail, right?
Right.
And let's say, and it's up, and then I go on the thing, but then bigger story breaks and you have to change the thumbnail.
Right.
It's kind of like that.
Example.
It's like last second. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Out of way, I'm like, oh.
I always feel bad about that because when Ray makes like some great bomb-ass thumbnail, but then like they announce a new Star Wars movie and I got to pull off his, take away his thumbnail.
And it's already shown, so I can't use it again. So,
Right.
But so like, you know, if this is unusual as it's, from what it sounds, so last second, it's unusual, but Raimi still is on board. So I mean,
and we are hearing it from Bruce Campbell's perspective,
right?
And he's hearing something he's never really heard from Sam Raimi before, and he's like, "Can you believe that?" Like, I'm sure part of it's in his own. Like, I don't know if I'm in this movie. Benedict Cumberbatch might not be in this movie. So his comments, you also have to kind of read between the lines. It's not like he's saying this movie's a disaster and Sam's been thwarted at every turn. He's like, I've never seen anything like this before.
Go ahead, Ray.
Oh, I'm just saying, doesn't that make you more excited though? I know what he's saying is like could be seen as bad, but from him saying, I don't know who's in this movie, the possibilities are endless now.
I absolutely took that from this. And
it's what, 2 weeks?
By the way,
Less.
I'm sure they thought about, I'm sure Kevin Feige probably said, hey, we can get so-and-so to cameo in this movie. Like, let's say Tom Cruise is in it.
Oh my God.
And I can imagine Sam Raimi going, wait, what? You want Tom Cruise to come cameo in this film?
I don't know if Kevin Feige would do that because Kevin Feige's the same guys who went like, hey, yay, we got X-Men now, but I got my plan already. Like,
Right. But I mean, they probably could. There's still, I can imagine they come up with cool stuff.
Oh, hey, listen, I'm a red philosopher, but
maybe Raimi himself said, as a Marvel Comics fan, what if we did this?
I want to bring up something unpopular, but I think this is an appropriate point to bring it up again. What was it? Mark Ruffalo? Was it either Mark Ruffalo or Tom Holland? One of the two of them recently talked about Kevin Feige and saying, I know it sounds weird to say, but Kevin Feige is underrated for how much he has to do with Marvel.
I think it was Ruffalo.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was Ruffalo. It's like people just don't get it. Like, and it brings up the thing again about, let's say, the Russo brothers, who I adore. I adore Joe and Anthony. They have been on my in my sets and on my studios many times. They've sent me wonderful video messages. They're incredible. I will always be fans of theirs. But I don't know that it's a coincidence that before working with Kevin Feige, nobody really knew their names and who they were. They work with Kevin Feige. They're the hottest things in Hollywood. Once they stop working with Kevin Feige, let's just say it's been challenging. Let's just say it's been challenging since they stopped. You know, they had 21 Bridges that they were the main forces behind and the main producers on. They had, what was it, Cherry? That
they directed.
And honestly wasn't very good. I mean, it's been, a little, then they did Extraction that they wrote and they produced, which a lot of people like. I personally didn't like it all that much, but a bunch of people did. But still, it's been a little bit more challenging. I think all this really points to maybe as much glory and praise that we give Kevin Feige, maybe it's not even enough. Maybe we got to recognize it. He makes even, this is what made Wayne Gretzky so good. The people start working with him, he makes everybody around him better.
Right.
I mean, which is the best thing I think you can say about an executive.
Well, remember, like, he's the one that's been thinking about 20, 30, 40 movies for 14 years.
And ahead.
And Raimi, and ahead. And Raimi comes in, he hires Raimi, he likes Raimi, they've worked together before. This is what I want you to make. You're a big fan of this character already. And yet Raimi is like, okay, I'm focused on this Doctor Strange movie. I am not thinking 4 films down the road and what these cameos might mean for the next movie. So the directors Kevin Feige hires shouldn't, by the way, think about the things that Kevin Feige's working about, because they should be thinking about the movie they're making. And it is Kevin Feige who has to keep this all. Dude, what is this, the 29th? Is this the 28th, the 29th Marvel movie?
There's a lot.
It's more than I have fingers and toes.
I mean,
once after that, it just becomes math.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And then we still got 2 more this year. Does that mean Wakanda Forever is like the 30th? I think Wakanda Forever is the 30th Marvel movie.
I'm not sure.
I'm surprised he hasn't let it off the rails. I mean, with so many movies, you got to give credit to Feige. I mean, this thing could have went off the rails with so many,
With every single movie.
yeah, with so many things to keep track of and like to make sure. Yeah, of course we'll have some loopholes. It's gonna always have loopholes, but to keep it like this.
Look, the fact
for
that
so
your
long,
audience wants to see this movie, how excited are we that we jaded film pundits that we are? How excited are you, John?
Drooling.
Right?
Absolutely drooling to see this movie.
Me too. And you? Right?
Come on.
I rest my case.
Especially since we saw some Gore the God Butcher.
But I have to say that made me even more excited.
Oh, it did. It did for me too.
But that's for Thor.
Like that. You're right. That is for Thor.
I
You're
mean,
right.
that's another movie.
I'm so excited about all of it. I'm getting them
We'll
confused
just skip
overlapping.
Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah. Anyway, guys, question is for you. What do you think about these statements from Bruce Campbell? I mean, really, at this point, Marvel interfering in a Marvel movie is water wet. It works. It's the thing that works for them. I don't know. Why should we expect anything different? How do you guys feel about it? Jump down to the comment section below and leave your thoughts there.